According to National Geographic, Leah Aks, then an 18-year-old new mother, and her 10-month-old baby, Frank, Philly Aks, were on board the Titanic on that fateful night. Leah climbed aboard the Titanic with her son in tow as a third-class passenger. A third-class ticket on the Titanic was much more lavish than it was on any other ship of their time. And on the night of April 14th, 1912, Leah went to a third-class party where she ate foods she had never tried before and met other bright-eyed immigrants anxious for the future ahead. Later that night, Leah was awoken by a knock on her door and was confronted by chaos and confusion. When she ran up to the sea deck, she was met by panicked shouts and confrontation. Lifeboats had been dropped in the water, and the distress flares were lighting up the sky. What happened next? Well, today we are going to hear the story straight from one of Leah's great-granddaughters here on Titanic Legacy, the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to a show that explores Titanic's lasting impact through conversations with creators, authors, artists, historians, filmmakers, musicians, entrepreneurs, family members, and more who continue to keep the Ship of Dreams legacy not only alive, but thriving through their lives, their creative work, and their storytelling. I am your host, Paul Carganilla, and today, for the very first time, I'm joined by a co-host.
Me!
My daughter, talented musician, movie star, and my lovely little girl, Everly Carganilla. Hi!
Thank you very much.
To the virtual audience out there in the
hello.
digital spaces. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
We're going to have a conversation with as we mentioned, family member of a Titanic survivor. She used to be a music professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I recently was able to connect with her on Facebook. And yeah, great-granddaughter of a survivor. I don't know the story, and I can't wait to hear it for the first time with all of you out there. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to Titanic Legacy Podcast, Shelley Binder.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for making the time to join us and keep your family's story going. And I ask at the top of every episode, as on this show, I have the honor of connecting with people all around the world in different time zones. Where in the world are you?
I am in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm actually right outside of it in Farragut.
Okay.
So I'm about, 15 minutes from Knoxville. And I came here from my hometown where Leah settled and spent her life, Norfolk, Virginia. So.
Very, very cool. And so this is the first time we've met. I did a little bit of Googling, and from what I could tell, you're a musician, professional musician, used to teach music?
Yes, I'm a classical flutist. And I retired in right at the beginning of 2020. And I devoted myself now to really trying to research my great-grandmother's story, which my goal is to write a book, but also I became in the process of Titanic, because now I'm one of you guys. I in love with the story as much as anybody, but my goal really is to travel around and get primary source research. So I went to Belfast. I talked to people there. I went into the Thompson Graving Dock and filmed there. I went to Sir Walter Lord's files that he had donated to the Caird Library at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich in the UK. And I've of course, I had to visit, which I've done several times, the only existing steamship sort of the time, the Queen Mary. In fact, I was just there a couple months ago, and I redid a photo of her because she actually was on the Queen Mary in 1938. So yeah, I'm really trying to correct some of the information on the internet that isn't quite right about my family. I know there were, 712 survivors. Of course, 2 are my relatives. But what I've been finding is that a lot of research that was done early on has been copied and shared numerous times, but it's not accurate anymore based on new research that has been done. And a lot of that information was hearsay. So my goal is to really make sure that anything I put out there about my great-grandmother is, I have proof, like actual primary source research to prove it.
Such an interesting thing, and I've talked about it on this show so many times. Like, hindsight 2020, Monday morning quarterbacking. But if we didn't just talk to the people who were interviewed at the Senate hearings, if we talked to everybody and got everybody's stories, how different the whole picture, the whole painting of Titanic would be. But one of the things I think that draws so many Titaniacs in are just the wealth of what is actually out there, the new stories that you hear, the new discoveries that are still being made by people like yourself. And as a lot of we've also talked about, it went one of 2 ways when they got off the ship. It was, let me share my story right here in the spotlight, or it was, I don't want to talk about it. And so for family members generations later to still be carrying on the stories and still be telling the stories of their heritage, their Titanic heritage, I think we're doing a great service. What you're doing is wonderful for keeping all of their memories alive. But of course, your family's lineage, most importantly. So thank you for being here. Thank you for telling the story. And if I may ask, like, as someone I mentioned who hasn't heard your great grandmother's story, would you do us the honor of sharing it with us?
I'd be happy to. So they originally, both my great grandparents were from Poland. At the time, it was part of Russia. Now it's Poland. But so my great grandmother was from Warsaw. So when you see records, it'll say she was from Warsaw, Russia, but it was under Russian control at that time. And then my great grandfather, by coincidence, was from about an hour away, also in Poland, in a village called Łódź, or it looks like Lodz, but with some accents. So it's pronounced Łódź. They did not know each other. And there was some serious political distress in that country around that time. And my great grandmother's brother, Solomon, was probably like 14, 15 years old. And a lot of young men were being conscripted into the Russian army. Well, he didn't want to do that, and his parents certainly didn't want to see him conscripted against his will into the Russian army. So they sent him first. They sent Solomon. He left Warsaw and he made it to London. There was nobody else, but he managed to get a job, and he worked for a time until he had earned enough money to bring his family over as well to join him in London. So she was, just a young girl, like maybe 6 or 7, when she and her mother, father, and her 2 other brothers Max and Abraham also traveled to, meet up with Solomon, who was already in the UK. And so when she was there, she met another immigrant to the UK, or his name was Sam Aks, and he had escaped Poland as well. His story is equally as dramatic as hers. That's why I have a very difficult time telling her story without first just spending a minute telling his. So things were so bad in his village that his father was killed in 1904. His father's name also was Frank Philip Aks, just like my great uncle, my grandmother's brother, was Frank Philip Aks. And so my great grandfather and his brother had no money, no way to get out to help his mother, who had all these kids. So they were very strong. My great grandfather eventually was 6'3". He had bright red hair, freckles, and he was quite the sight. And the way they earned money to get across Poland to Hamburg, Germany, in order to get a ship over to the UK, was they boxed. They were very, very strong, physically strong. And they would box each other. They would do exhibitions. They would box other people for money, but he was a boxer. So eventually he took a ship called the Portia from Hamburg, Germany, over to the UK. And then he stayed there for 4 years. But he hadn't met Leah yet. So his goal always was automobiles, to be involved in automobiles, because automobiles were pretty new at that time. But they caught his imagination, and that was all he wanted. And he wanted to be an American. He wanted to come to the US. That was the hub of, the burgeoning automobile business. So he worked, probably boxing, probably doing odd jobs, but he finally earned enough money with his brother to take a steamship, which was not cheap, over in 1908, which was called the Celtic, also a very important and popular steamship of the time. And the problem, and the most amazing thing, is that when he got to Ellis Island, along the journey, he had caught the chicken pox.
Oh,
That's rough.
you haven't had the chicken pox yet. How do you know? Yeah, knocking on wood.
Knock on wood, yeah. So his brother got in, but he didn't. They sent him back the very next day on the same ship, the Celtic. And it was probably fate, because when he went back, he met and married my great grandmother. That's when they met. So if he hadn't have gotten the chicken pox, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation.
Best case of chicken pox ever.
Yay, chicken pox for once.
So yeah, that's how they met in the East End of London. And then he was a real showman. I mean, his personality was as big, if not bigger, than Weave's. Okay. Really a showman, a born showman.
For anyone who's like, who is Weebs? That we were talking before we went live, that is Everly's nickname. So
it's a long story how it started. So,
but a big personality, just like you.
Yeah.
Big personality, yes. And he knew how to entertain people, and he loved people, and he was very attractive. So he told my great grandmother, I want to marry you, but you have to agree to go to the United States. That was the condition. And because I know what I want, and I want to be involved in automobiles. And so it was a hard sell because her family had 3 boys and only 1 girl. And they didn't really want her to leave. But she did. So in 1911, he decided he was going to come over again. So the second time, he took a ship called the Haverford, and he got here in my husband's birthday, September 18th of 1911. And he did not want to be sent back. He was very afraid of that because he had heard that if you came to the US and you were at Ellis Island and then you were not given entrance or sent away, you were not let back in. So when he went back to London in 1908, he had created an alias, and he called himself Sam Axman, Axman. But that was never our name. That's not a historically correct name. I think he did it because he didn't want to be turned away from the US. That's all he wanted, was to be an American.
Axman, like AKSMAN?
Yes.
Axman.
Yes.
Paul Bunyan.
That sounds like a superhero game.
It does. No hands, axes. It's the Axeman.
I love it.
And he could have been, because he was really a physical specimen, very, very strong. And so he decided, instead of going from Southampton to New York to Ellis Island, he went from Liverpool to Philadelphia. And of course, that was way before any kind of computerized records or anything. And he eventually came on his own name, Sam Aks, and he got in. And he moved to my hometown, Norfolk. That's where he settled. And then what happened was Leah was supposed to come over fairly soon after he had found a place to live and gotten settled. Well, a couple events that year happened that made that difficult. So one was the coal strike. So in 1912, apparently for like a 90-day period, it was quite a problem to find enough coal for these ships, because they needed, tons and tons and tons of coal. And so ships were either, the passengers were coalesced on, if you were on White Star or another shipping line, they would try, if there was room, they would put you on another ship. So she was initially not supposed to be on the Titanic, but in interviewing my great aunt in London, I went and talked to her. She was 103 at the time.
Wow.
Yes, she told me that actually, her, as I mentioned, she was the only girl. Her parents didn't want her to leave London, but they said, if you agree to wait 3 more months, we will make up the difference in the cost of the ticket, and we will send you over on the safest ship ever built.
Unsinkable. Trust me, there will be nothing wrong. It's gonna be great.
At 7,500 people will definitely not die.
That's right. That many people definitely did not die.
You can count on that. Sure, this safe is that safe. This ship is that safe, guys.
I think your numbers are a little skewed, but
Yes.
That too.
okay. So she was in good hands. They wanted to send her over on what they knew was the sure bet.
Right. And it was, billed as being much more. Third class was undoubtedly much more luxurious than it was even on the Celtic, or on the Haverford even. It was, so for many reasons, the coal strike, her parents agreed to pay the difference in the ticket, and they got to keep her there. Of course, she had given birth in June to my great uncle, her first son, whose his full name was Frank Philip Aks. Well, he was named after my great grandfather's father, but they called him Philly, Filly. And so he was, at the time that they finally did get on the Titanic, he was 10 months old and she was 18 years old. So she left from, I believe, Waterloo Station. She took the boat train to Southampton. I've retraced her steps too. And so she, this was an epic journey. She was pretty sheltered, I think, in her family. And so, I mean, can you imagine Everly getting on a ship when you were 18 years old and you had a 10-month-old baby, and you were going to a new continent where you knew literally nobody except your own slightly older husband?
No, but like I feel like that's way too young to have a child. Like you just became an adult.
Times have changed.
I do agree with you, but you have to understand, people didn't live as long then, right? I mean, so I think it was customary for people to get married as young as even 14, 15, 16 years old.
14.
One of our guests that we've had on several times and was one of our speakers at Titanic Anniversary Weekend on the Queen Mary last month, Laura Decker Ward, her grandmother, Selene Yazbek, 15-year-old bride on Titanic from Lebanon. Yeah, it was a thing, babe.
Well, and another thing too about her is that she ended up living in the same hometown as Leah, and they eventually.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. And they were in the newspaper together. Yeah. So definitely.
So we're obviously going to have you on one of these future family member roundtables, but have you and Laura been in touch?
No.
Really?
Nope.
All right. Well, we're going to bring you together. Just like Titanic was built to bring people together. That's what this podcast is doing. So we're going to do that.
Yes. It's kind of interesting, though. I do have a number of descendants as friends. So it's kind of like a great-granddaughters, great-grandchild club.
Yeah.
I've met quite a few at various places. And when I went over to research Walter Lord's files, I had been in touch with the great-grandson of Robert Hitchens.
Yeah.
Simon Medhurst. And I said, hey, Simon, I'm in London. Would you and Anne come and have lunch with me? So they actually came to the museum, and we had a great time. I showed him around the library and let him, showed him some of the stuff that was there, and it was so much fun. So, and of course, Molly Brown's great-granddaughter, Helen Benzinger, and I got to hold the little Egyptian amulet. She let me hold that at one of the conventions that we met at, and of course, Julie, who was the great-granddaughter of the Caldwells.
Great-grandniece.
Yes, you're right. Yes, great-grandniece. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I mean, they've all been involved in the Titanic roundtables that we've had here on the podcast. So welcome to the family. We'll get you in on the next one.
I can't wait. I'm going to hold you to that, Paul.
Oh, well,
I want to meet and talk to Everly more too, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll have lunch.
I'm throwing it. We're 11 months away, but of course, if you're able to make the trip out to Long Beach next April, we're going to be on the ship again, April 11th through 14th, and would love to have you there.
I would
But
love.
we're getting ahead of ourselves. We still want to hear great grandmother's story.
Okay, so she got on the train, or the subway train, which was actually, she picked it up at Waterloo Station. She then went to Southampton, and she got on the Titanic on the 10th of April in 1912 with her baby. And when she got on, she was surprised but happy to discover that it wasn't fully booked, so she had a room to herself, which she was not expecting. So that was a fun thing for her, and I think she had a wonderful time on the ship. You
That
know,
is something that's kind of overlooked is like, since it was a brand new ship and it wasn't traveling season, it was only at like 60 something percent capacity, which is a blessing in hindsight, obviously.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of leg room, a lot of areas to stretch out if you were a passenger.
right, exactly. And I think she took full advantage of that because, as I mentioned, I think she was fairly sheltered. And all of a sudden, I can't. As an 18-year-old, I'm free to go on this, the greatest ship ever built in the world, and I'm going to a new continent. What an adventure. So she was, I think, really enjoying it. And the thing that I sent you her two newspaper accounts, and one of the things that I think is really cool is that she went to the party that was depicted in Cameron's film, 1997 film. And she talks about being at the party and how fun it was, the party in third class. And that is the night of April 14th. And so eventually, she talked about them kicking her out of the party, kicking them out at 10 o'clock, I think, because the crew wanted to go to sleep.
Right.
The deadline. So she went back and she got the baby ready for bed. And then she was in her nightgown. She was in bed, but she wasn't sleeping.
Mm.
And she heard a knock on her door. And it was a woman, a young woman who she had met on the trip. Now, something to remember is that the ship was kind of, the occupants of the ship were divided. The women and the children who were emigrating, mostly in third class, were in the aft portion of the ship. And then in the front of the ship was young men traveling alone. They were in the forecastle, the bow of the ship. And then in the middle, there was quite a slice of, first class, second class, and some third class. And so she was in the aft section, the stern, and that gets us up to, the big action. So this young woman.
Can I ask a question before? Because it's burning in the back of my brain. And I encourage anybody who's watching the YouTube live stream, if you have any questions for Shelley, go ahead and drop them while we are recording this live. I'll be able to ask any questions that you have out there. But because one of my pet peeves is when I'm like, oh, yeah, my son's in another state working on a project, and people go, alone without you? I'm like, are you kidding? But when you say she's at this third class party and then she goes and gets the son, was there a daycare situation?
No, he was with her.
Oh, okay.
Her at the party.
Nice.
Yeah. But
that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it was unwholesome. I think it was
right.
Just, it must have been just so fun because there were a lot of young people emigrating. So there was a lot of people her age. There was a lot of women with children. and babies. And they were all playing music from whatever country they were from, and different instruments like the Uilleann pipes, the bagpipes. And, of course, Cameron's film in 97 depicts, a rat chasing the rat and everything. Well, that's because he followed the research of, for the most part, of Sir Walter Lord.
Yeah.
And that is actually true. That actually did happen. So,
and I just have to mention a quick, really neat connection in our YouTube audience right now for the live stream is Judy Preston Ince, who was a main background core extra on James Cameron's Titanic, and she was in the third class party scene, and she's watching the conversation live with the descendant of someone who was actually at that party.
Yes.
And she asks it before we zoom right back to the night of the sinking. She's asking a question in the chat. Did you always know about your grandmother's history, or did you learn about it after you grew up?
It is the very first memory I ever had.
Oh, wow.
I don't ever remember not knowing about it. I mean, it was pretty big in our family. Every school report, every book report, it was done on the Titanic and presenting it. And in fact, we even had some things in our attic, which were eventually donated to a museum in my hometown, actually slightly different, in Newport News. But yeah, I mean, I've always known about it my whole life. It was quite a big deal.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, Rose. So here we are on the night of the sinking. Can you tell us what happened next?
So it's a little different from the National Geographic. And this is, as I said, only because of a lot of research and a lot of family stories. But initially, the woman said that knocked on her door, another young woman who she had met and made friends with. Well, let's just go up on the deck. And this was the aft well deck, the C deck, and just see what's going on. There were two young women. They were having a good time. So they put their wool coats on and over their nightgown, and they went up the stairs and came out into the aft well deck, and there was no activity, none. They saw a crewman, and they said, we heard that the ship hit something. Are we in any danger? And he said, oh, that's ridiculous. No, go back to bed. And I think the man was Rowe, and I think he was a quartermaster, but he was the one on the bridge in the back, the parking bridge there, right above the poop deck and the aft well deck. And so they were just two young girls, just, nobody was there. It was the most beautiful night. There was no moon. You could see the entire Milky Way. It was supposedly absolutely spectacular, breathtaking, because of course she was from London. So there's, pollution of all kinds, including light pollution. So she never saw that. So all of a sudden, she's on the air was very cold. It was probably 27, 28 degrees. And they were walking around, and they went to the side of the ship, and she looked over, and that's when her blood started to run cold, and she saw a lifeboat in the water. And of course, there's no reason.
So Quartermaster Rowe says everything's fine, go back to your room, yet we're sending out lifeboats.
Right. But apparently, I just read something that said that he didn't know what had happened.
Oh.
He did not know. They had to tell him to come and bring the rockets. He was one. So yeah, that's part of the story.
Wow.
And wow. I mean, he could have legitimately not really known initially.
Mhm.
So when they saw the lifeboats in the water, um, immediately, well, soon after that, the the steam horn started to go off, and this was very traumatic, I think, for many people, because if you've ever been next to a boat horn, it is ear shattering. It's incredibly loud, but you only ever hear like very short blasts of the horn.
They still do it on the Queen Mary 3 times a day, and
No, four
it's
times. They do it at 9 or 10. No, 9. No, 10,
noon.
12, 3, and 6.
Yeah, and it basically shakes the ship.
It does. The first night that we were at the Queen Mary, the fire alarm went off, and it was a traumatic
Oh my
experience.
gosh.
Yeah, someone
Yeah.
was smoking in their room, but
In the
like,
middle of the night, somebody's vaping in their room, and the
Oh,
the smoke alarms on the Queen Mary do not mess around.
they're scarier than the regular ones because they don't go brown, brown. They talk to you. They're like, a fire has been reported on your level. Gather
oh
your,
my.
like, get out immediately. And it's so scary. And like, so we were going, and so am now traumatized from alarms. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. I have a
But
funny story about that. Just a little bit of a side note.
yeah,
Everly will like this one. When I was in Belfast, Ireland, and I, showed up basically unannounced. I think it was 2018 was the first time I went there. I emailed them a night before because I had been in London, and I said, I'm coming to Belfast and I'm a descendant, and here's my information, my great grandmother and my great uncle's names and everything. So when I showed up, there was press and all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, what is this about? Because I've been many places and never gotten that kind of response.
right.
And they said, well, we've been looking for you,
oh, that's wonderful.
which
That's
is so weird, because I sent you that picture. I sent you a picture of the placards from Belfast, from the exhibit that they did. I showed up on like June 18th, and they were doing a retrospective on the 100th year anniversary of the sinking of the Carpathia during World War One. And they were bringing Captain Rostron's great-granddaughters over to open the exhibit. And they wanted stories to make them understand how grateful everybody was to their great grandfather. I think they probably really understood that already, but so one of the really amazing stories happens with my family, and that is and I'll kind of get to that in a minute, but my great grandmother got separated from her baby in the sinking, and she didn't reconnect with him or even know he was alive until 4 days after that on the Carpathia. And the person that reconnected them was Captain Rostron. And so she always had an incredible fondness for him. And of course, that's when she decided she was going to name her second child after the ship that saved them, Carpathia. And you have that picture to show in a little while too, of my grandmother's birth certificate. But
That's amazing. And when we were at the Titanic exhibit last summer, they have the loving cup that Captain Western was given there at the exhibit.
Yeah, that I've seen it as well. I actually live pretty close to a pretty good Titanic museum in Pigeon Forge, which is only like half an hour, 45 minutes from my house here in Knoxville. So, but okay, so going back to,
so the horns are going off.
Yeah, and it was deafening. You could literally scream at the top of your voice right into somebody's face, and they couldn't hear anything.
Oh,
Yeah, and it wasn't just short beeps like on the Queen Mary, it was unstopping for 50 minutes. So almost
Oh,
an hour,
Mm.
I would not be.
nearly an hour. And so this complicated everybody's trying to escape because they couldn't talk to each other. That and the fact that a lot of people did not speak English. So that was also a problem. My great grandmother did speak English, but because she had, lived for a number of years in England and gone to school there. But so this horn is blaring, and they're out there, and they went from the highest high where they're two young girls just traveling on the most luxurious ship ever built, safest ship ever built, and they're just having a good time on this aft well deck. Then it turned to horror when they saw the lifeboat in the water, the horns going off, and then they start shooting rockets off.
And she's got your great grandfather in her arms at this point?
My great uncle.
Your great uncle, sorry.
Yeah.
But he's with her?
No. So the women freaked out, ran back down to get their babies because they realized
they left them.
Right. They left them sleeping for.
Oh, they were sleeping.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's better
don't
than...
wake them up, just leave them sleeping in
right,
the cabin. Right. And when they got them dressed, it was really sad. Like in her account, and one of them, she talks about she tried to get a life jacket on him, but it was, it was too big. It wouldn't stay on him. So, she got him dressed warmly. And when she left her cabin again, all the companionways are crowded, totally jammed full of people. And as you undoubtedly know, a lot of people were carrying everything they owned and trying to get up the narrow companionways and the stairs. And now there's pushing and shoving. When they first went up, there was nobody. And when they got up to the aft well deck, of course, they couldn't get up the two narrow staircases that went up either side to the B deck, the second class deck, not because of the gates, but because it was a log jam. There were just people crowded, with luggage and belongings and all kinds of stuff going up those stairs. So a lot of those women and children, which were in the aft section of the ship, just hunkered down. They just sat down. They didn't know what to do. A lot of them didn't speak English. Nobody was giving them any direction or what to do. They saw the lifeboats being launched and filled, but they couldn't get up there. So young crewmen saw this happening and that these women had absolutely no chance to get into a lifeboat. So they jumped down deck by deck. Maybe they jumped on one of the crane arms, the cargo cranes, and then they got on the crane housing maybe, and then jumped onto the hatch cover. And then they would try to get women to, be lifted deck by deck so that they could have a chance to be saved.
Yeah.
So, maybe it looked like, I do have a recording of it. I can share it with you. I recreated this at the university I taught at, where I used the University of Tennessee cheerleaders to kind of recreate what it looks like to be lifted 9.5 feet and then climb over a banister 3.5 feet approximately. And it was pitch black, no moon. The ship was now tilted down by the bow, and it was also now listing to the port side. And she's having to in 1912, take this bizarre opportunity that was offered to her by these young men: step on my knee, step on my shoulder, step on my head, pass to the next man.
Yeah. It's a human ladder. And for reference, for anyone listening or watching, that, what's 9.5 feet? So a basketball hoop, professional basketball hoop is 10 feet. So imagine trying to climb up on top of a basketball hoop, and then there's a little gate that's 3 more feet, you're saying. So you're climbing humans. You're not climbing a ladder on a ship that is tilting.
Exactly. And it's freezing cold. And I don't know if you've ever tried to use your hands when you're freezing, but they don't work very well.
And you have a baby.
And he was a very big baby. And that was the funny part. Not funny, but he was approximately 23 pounds. Now, she was a tiny woman, okay, 5 feet or less. And she's carrying a 23-pound baby and climbing up from the C deck, up to the B deck, up to the A deck, up to the boat deck, utilizing young men, strangers who, she just took a leap of faith and did it. And I'm quite grateful. If she hadn't, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you. So, I mean, really, it's kind of, it makes me really understand. She was somewhat of a badass. Sorry, Everly, you don't ever want to use that term. But I mean, it really makes me understand, first of all, how lucky I am to have a life, but that she was so brave and that she fought for her life. And a lot of those third-class women chose not to. They were afraid to do that. And on the Queen Mary, you can see me reaching up on that one picture I sent you, because that was the same height deck. And you could see I'm taller than she was. It must have been absolutely terrifying.
It's crazy to think too, like the actions of total strangers, the heroic actions of people who had no idea what, whatever they're doing is going to, the dominoes they're going to create down the line. And then we have the opportunity to speak, not only just to like speak with you. I'm not trying to be selfish here, but like your family line is here because of these young men who created this human ladder for them.
And sadly, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I would say almost definitely most of them didn't live.
Yeah.
I mean, they just did that out of true heroism and humanity, that they tried to rescue those women and children who had no way to get up.
Yeah.
I mean, the men, third class, whoever was a male who was there, I mean, they were fighting their way up those log jam steps. I mean, the women were like, nah, I'm not going to try to do that. So yeah, I mean, it was, and keep in mind too, that there were rockets being shot off. There was more slams being fired. There were, it was freezing cold. She was dealing with a absolutely life or death situation. She was completely terrified, holding a very large baby, trying to do this. And so, what I will say, when I grew up, we all had stories, and, we're all constantly telling the story to people, but I hadn't really done the research that I've done now. So I didn't really have an appreciation for the scene it must have been. And, the horn blaring and rockets going off and total hysteria in third class. People crying and praying and, yeah, it was something else. And what happened was, when we did the recreation, and you can see it, if you go to put in University of Tennessee Titanic recreation, you can see how, we did that. They made it look easy because they're used to lifting people. But I got to choose which cheerleader was going to be her. I took a baby doll and I strapped 23 pounds of sand on him. And she had to carry him and do that. And, what happened was, Bill Wormstad, who was absolutely. I mean, Titanic researchers have been so kind to me, like Don Lynch, George Behe, and Bill Wormstadt, who, dear friends. And I told Bill, in the family, she said she never let go of that baby. They traveled up together. Well, Bill said he actually came up when we did the live shot that got on television of her climbing up out of third class. And, he said, there's no way she'd have to climb up, put her foot on B deck, and then get over the balcony. You can't do that holding a 23-pound baby. And I said, no, she said she did it. And so there he is. That's my baby that it's hard to find a 23-pound baby doll. So I had to kind of go rogue there. But you can see that railing is approximately the right height. And Bill Wormstadt actually traveled up and measured that scissor lift with a tape to make sure it was accurate. Yeah. So, and they actually have the live footage of them doing it. And of course, they made it look way too easy. But what happened, we think, Bill was right in the end. She had to have handed that baby off because she, to put your feet on one deck and get over the railing, you needed your hands to do that. So I think what happened is that and this was quite late in the sinking too. I mean, they estimate that it was probably as late as maybe 1:50, so like 10 to 2, and the ships, of course, sank at 2:20. That when she got to the top, when she got up to where the boats were, and now the ship is, it's got the port tilt now, so the lifeboats were sitting, swinging away from the side, and you couldn't see them standing on the deck. You didn't see a lifeboat. It was hanging there, and the boat was tilted. So if you looked out, you looked over it. You didn't see it. So if you remember the baker,
Charles Jochen.
Yeah.
Yes, Charles. He was a baker, which is interesting because Leah's father was a baker. So he was literally, they were taking people's baby. They couldn't get them to go in because you had to step across a gap 75 feet from the water in pitch blackness to get into the lifeboat.
Crazy.
Well, a lot of people couldn't make themselves do it.
Mm-hmm.
So what they did was they would take their babies and throw it to a man in the lifeboat.
Oh,
Yes.
here you go, catch.
Yeah.
A little too high.
A little short, my bad.
Oops. So, but she saw this out of the corner of her eye when she got up to the deck. They took the baby out of her arms to help her, and she looked up and saw him being thrown over, but he was being thrown into a lifeboat, but she didn't realize that.
Right, because she, at the angle, she couldn't see the lifeboat, so she thought her baby had just been thrown from the Titanic.
Exactly. So she was absolutely hysterical, and she just ran around looking everywhere for him, asking people, have you seen my baby? Have you seen my baby? And she really, at that point, she was so upset because all she could think about was, even if they rescue me, how am I going to explain to my husband that his first child, his first son, was dead and I lived? And she said she just contemplated jumping over herself. She was like, I'm done. I don't care anymore. So eventually, we think that she was walking up and down the decks, and like on a deck, maybe went down to boat 4. Initially, like on early accounts, it says that she was in 13 and he was in 11. Well, that they've updated that now. And they think that he could have very well been in one of the port boats that Joachim was throwing the babies into, and that she probably was on the A deck, and she actually got into the same boat as Madeline Astor, who actually has a part in my family history. And it was always a story that my great-grandmother met Madeline Astor on the Titanic, okay, which she would never have met her because my great-grandmother was in third class and Madeline Astor was in first class.
Right.
But the story went that she was standing waiting to get into a lifeboat, and Madeline Astor saw her holding the baby and said, and of course, Madeline Astor was approximately the same age. She was 1 year older, 19, and herself pregnant, 5 months pregnant, looked at her and said, "Your baby looks cold," and took off her scarf and wrapped it around the baby.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I don't believe that happened. We did have a scarf, okay, and I do believe it could have been Madeline Astor's, but when I went to the Caird Library and I was researching Walter Lord's files, of course, he wrote to 85, I think, Titanic survivors and got their accounts in their own handwriting. And it was fascinating. I was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, it was wild. But I found a letter by Mrs. Ogden. Do you remember who Mrs. Ogden was? I mean, I know you're of Titanic, but the name Ogden.
The name Ogden's ringing a bell. I maybe know. Does her husband have a more notable story?
Sort of, because he had the camera on the Carpathia and the camera and took the photos of the lifeboats, coming up to the Carpathia.
Yes.
Well, she was a socialite, and she knew, and on the Carpathia, all of the officers gave up their cabins to first-class women survivors. So in her letter, she says who was staying in Captain Rostron's cabin. Who was staying in Captain Rostron's cabin? And she says it in there. Madeline Astor, Eleanor Widener, and Mrs. Thayer. They were in Captain Rostron's cabin. Well, she was so pathetic when she got onto rightly so, when she got onto the Carpathia, that she couldn't do anything. She just lay on a mattress, on the floor for days. And of course, it was storming as soon as they got on the Carpathia, which most people don't really know about. It took 4 days to get back. And as calm as the sea had been on the evening of the 14th and 15th, all of a sudden the sea started kicking up and storming. And so now they're on a smaller boat. She was just on a mattress on the floor. They were all seasick. There were like 75 widows now. They were morose. And people were absolutely hysterical. It was storming and there was fog. So Captain Rostron had to keep blowing the foghorn, which was very triggering because that had been a problem on the deck in the sinking.
Yeah.
The horn went off for almost an hour. So she wasn't eating, she wasn't drinking, she wasn't doing anything. Finally, the weather broke after a number of days, and Selina Cook, that was in she was in Life magazine in 1953, and that was when she attended that premiere of the 1903 movie Titanic. And she met up again with Selina Cook, and she also knew, yes. So there is my great grandmother with the monogrammed sweater there, LRA, and then Thelma Ritter, she got to meet her, and then the baby, the tiny little 23-pound baby, grew up to be a giant. So, but I think she did meet she undoubtedly met Madeline Astor, and I can prove it. She didn't meet her on the Titanic. I believe she met her on the Carpathia. She also met Eleanor Widener. She also met Marion Dare. Why? Because in a trance, they finally, when the weather broke on the Carpathia, they got her up and made her walk around the deck to get some air. So she was just in a trance walking around, and out of the corner of her eye, she sees a baby reaching out for her and calling out to her. Well, he knew that was his mother. He was still breastfeeding. Okay.
Yeah.
And she goes, "That's my baby." But another woman was holding him and had been caring for him. And she, as you'll hear when you play the recording from Robert Ripley's Believe It or Not, from her appearance there in 1939 with Robert Ripley himself on his radio show, the woman didn't speak any English. She was Italian. And I think that the woman was trying to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
She, I think, lost her husband. She was, thought this was like meant to be, that she's now going to take care of this baby. And so.
Sorry, but that's my son.
What do you mean?
I'm saying, I'm sorry, lady, but that's my boy.
Oh, yeah, that's my son. Oh, yes. So, they went to a crewman and they said, "There's a problem." And he said, "Okay, take both women and the baby up to Captain Rostron's cabin." Who was in Captain Rostron's cabin?
Madeline Astor.
That's right. Those 3 first-class ladies got the best cabin, Captain Rostron's cabin. And she even says it in her newspaper article, her account, that one of those ladies, she didn't mention their names. I found out in doing the research, but one of them, she says, gave her a scarf for her baby because the baby looked cold. And one of them gave her a $5 gold piece.
It's a lot of money back then.
It was, well, especially when you have nothing.
Yeah.
It was nothing for them. Any one of the 3 of them, that'd be 10 times that much in their couch cushions. So it was just such a beautiful kind of bit of humanity that those ladies showed and really felt for her, especially since Madeline Astor was 5 months pregnant and about her age. And so Captain Rostron came, and there was this big kind of Solomonistic moment where, whose baby is this? And, they figured it out. And of course, we're all freckly. You could see, can't really see it on camera here too well, but he had a birthmark, much like some of the ones I have on his chest. He described it, and he gave her baby back. Well, so that was the Carpathia. I'm trying to think if I missed anything. There's a lot to the story. When, as you know, I mean, they had a really difficult time transmitting the names.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Well, they started with first class, so it took a while before they got to third class names, but the weather was bad, and the Carpathia was a much smaller ship. She didn't have the range on the wireless, so they had a really difficult time transmitting these names via wireless. Of course, then a ship, a Navy ship, a U.S. Navy ship called the Chester, actually went out to meet the Carpathia and try to find out some more of the names, because, of course, President Taft's aide-de-camp had been lost on the Titanic, Archie Butt, and he wanted to know his fate, so he sent the Chester out to meet them. But in any case, another reason besides the storming and the poor transmission quality was that a lot of these people were foreign, and they're trying to spell their names without special characters. And, they came through. Like, there was one report that had her name spelled as Askaks. It was totally wrong. So, my great grandfather did not know that his wife and baby were alive until Thursday. And I got this from scouring the newspapers in my hometown, because I found kind of a small local paper, and they had formed a relationship with him, and they had gone to his tenement every day and interviewed him. And I had sent you, do you remember, Paul, I sent you a little graphic, a little round yellowed photo was one of the photos I sent. If you could put that up. So in the newspaper, he actually, in his hand, he's holding this, and it was a button with her photo on it. And he had also a photo of the baby. And she had given him those things on his journey to keep with him until they saw her again, or until they met again. So this button was probably when she was 14, I think. And maybe she got it at a fair or whatever. And she sent it with him when he went on his journey in 1911. And so this newspaper did articles with her each day. And so I know also that Henry Brandt, who was the White Star agent in Norfolk, went to his tenement once they finally got confirmation. And he was on the porch, and they told him, your wife and your baby are alive. This was after, he learned that the ship sank on Monday. So he heard nothing on Monday, nothing on Tuesday, nothing on Wednesday. Thursday, they finally find him and tell him. He was so shocked, he fainted, fell off his porch, and got a concussion. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
but I mean, it's big news.
Right.
Wow.
He had been mourning her loss. I mean, they were pretty sure, she said her family was mourning her loss in London, her parents, who, of course, had convinced her to wait the 3 months and go on the safest ship ever built.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a story. Titan's asking in the chat, have you been able to identify the Italian woman who took care of your granduncle?
My great uncle. Yeah. In the recording that you have, they say they even looked for her and they couldn't find her. Now, in several sources, notable sources, it identifies her as Elizabeth Nye, who did carry a baby for somebody, but I don't believe it was my great uncle. Or maybe she did carry him, but then the other woman took over for her on the Carpathia and had my great uncle. One of those two things. But this woman was Italian, and you can hear in my great grandmother's own voice and my great uncle's own voice that they looked for her. They wanted to thank her.
That's amazing.
They didn't find her. I would love to know who it was.
Let's take a listen to a little bit of that clip you're referring to. I know we're going way over time here, but it's just such a fascinating story. We're happy to do it. Can you just let people know who are listening what we're about to hear?
This is, she was at, my great grandmother and great uncle were asked to go to New York City and be a part of a broadcast of Robert Ripley's radio show on April 14th in 1939. And she is talking about her experience.
Very good. So in her own words, in her own voice.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present Miss Leah Aks.
Good evening, Mr. Chesley.
Mrs. Aks, I realize it's very difficult for you to speak of this terrible experience, but won't you try to tell us what happened after you saw your baby thrown into the sea?
I was pushed into a lifeboat, and we drifted around in the open sea for 7 hours.
You drifted around in the Atlantic in an open lifeboat for 7 hours before you were rescued?
Yes, that's right. But I didn't care whether I was rescued or not. My baby was born.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you can well imagine how Mrs. Aks felt after that horrible ordeal. But what followed was even more amazing. 4 days after she was rescued by the SS Carpathia, Mrs. Aks was carried out on deck together with other Titanic survivors. And now, Mrs. Aks, won't you tell us what happened then?
As I sat on the deck in a half-dazed condition, I suddenly heard a baby cry. I looked up. Near me was a woman with an infant in her arms. As I looked, the baby stretched its arms out to me.
And was it your baby?
Yes, it was.
That was a miracle.
The woman told me that she sits in a drifting lifeboat in the water when the baby fell straight into her lap.
You mean that your baby, after having been snatched from your arms and thrown overboard, fell into a woman's lap without being hurt?
You can see for yourself, for the baby is standing beside me now. Mr. Ripley, meet my son, Frank.
How do you do, Mr. Ripley? How do you do, Frank? I suppose you don't remember much about this terrible experience, do you? No, I was only 10 months old at that time. Tell me, Frank, since that time, have you ever met a woman who saved your life? No, sir. We completely lost track of her. My mother suffered a nervous collapse after that ordeal. I was in the hospital 11 months. I've often wondered who that woman was and where she is. Ladies and gentlemen, if that woman is listening in now, or if anyone knows of her whereabouts, I would appreciate it very much if he would write me a letter which I will forward to Mr. Aks. Thank you, Mr.
And we will say right here on Titanic Legacy Podcast, if you out there know anyone or are connected to anyone who may know who this woman is, contact me, Titanic Legacy Podcast at gmail.com, and let's get this connection going, reconnected, and let's solve this mystery. Yeah. Wow. So we just had 3 generations of your family's voice on this episode. I want to thank you so much. I know we've gone way over time, but thank you for sharing the story. Thank you for sharing this time with us. We are going to definitely make sure you're included in our future family roundtables and get you back on the show and get you connected with other family members and Simon and Helen again and new folks that you haven't met yet. This is a fun adventure that this podcast is taking us on, getting everybody together, we're getting the band back together, but no, keeping the Titanic bloodlines connected as we continue to celebrate her story. And while it was a tragedy at the time, it's created so much beauty, and I love to explore on this show the beauty it continues to create, the positive stories that come out of it, and the families of the survivors that are keeping it going. And as I will echo the sentiments of Lauren in the chat saying, please write a book. You mentioned you're thinking of working on one, or you're working on one, and let's get that into the world. Let's meet up live in Long Beach next April. But before we say goodbye for now, is there any last thoughts you want to share?
I just want to say thank you, Paul. I mean, this has been great. And I will hold you to inviting me to Long Beach because I love the Queen Mary, love spending time on her. And like I said, my great-grandmother was on the Queen Mary in 1938. So that makes me even like it that much more. And I even went there a couple times and redid the picture that he had taken, the publicity picture, in 1938, in I think it was the second class lounge, but she moved up in the world from third class. She made it to tourist class, second class in 1938. But I look forward to spending more time with you and geeking out with other Titaniacs because, Yes, do I have a connection? Absolutely. But even if I didn't, after doing all the research I have, I would have fallen in love with it anyway. And I love teaching, so I do tons of, reaching out to like kids doing their book reports or whatever, and they want to talk to me, and I'm happy to do that. I'm also a musician, so I play shows. So I did a recording where just a simple kind of thing where I tell my great grandmother's story and have a lot of photos, and I perform during it. So I'd like to do that next year in Long Beach. I'd love to play on the Queen Mary and see all my friends. Don Lynch lives out there. Hi, Don. I hope you're listening to this.
Yep, and he joined us on the Queen last month as well. And one thing I do want to do next year is a music hour where we have a little musical review with people who join us and have the musical capabilities and skills to perform some music. I got to do a little song with Nelson Aspen there during his block of time, and of course played some Nearer My God to Thee in the chapel as we did the memorial. And hopefully it's shaping up. It's 11 months away, but it's shaping up to be an amazing time. Anybody out there, mark your calendars. April 11, that's a Saturday, through 14, that's a Tuesday. We're stretching it out, and we're doing celebrating Titanic there on the Queen. Hope to see you there, Shelley. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you everybody for listening. If you want to help our show reach more people, there's a really easy, free way to do that. That's share the link, leave a positive review if you can on your favorite podcast platform or on the YouTubes. And once again, let's say a big, loud thank you, standing ovation to Shelley Binder for joining us, sharing her great grandmother's story with us. Thank you everyone for spending your time with us. I know time is the most valuable thing we have, and I appreciate every moment that you spend listening to these stories and keeping the memories alive. And until next episode, seize the day, follow your heart's fire.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Everly.
Thank you.
Make each day count. That's right. It's like you've heard this before.
I have.
You've listened to some episodes?
Yeah.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.